Welcome to Tweener Madness, the high-stakes startup showdown where 8 promising companies go head-to-head for a $25,000 investment prize from the Triangle Tweener Fund. But before the competition kicks off, let's meet the people making the tough calls, the judges. In this special Meet the Judges episode, we're sitting down with the investors and industry leaders who will be asking the hard-hitting questions, evaluating the startups, and ultimately deciding who moves forward in this bracket-style competition. Each round, 3 judges will vote on which startups advance, leading up to the finals in early April, where one company will take home the top prize. From the judges, you'll hear about their backgrounds, what they look for in a winning startup, and maybe even get a little inside scoop on their decision-making process. So, if you're a founder looking for investment, an entrepreneur curious about what investors really want, or just someone who loves a good business battle, you are in the right place. Let's meet the judges. Here's your host, Scot Wingo.
Randy Myer, thanks for joining us. You are one of our illustrious selection committee members for Tweener Madness. We're excited to have you.
That's very nice of you to ask me. And I looked at the list of others and I feel very privileged to be part of that group. It's a good group.
Oh, yeah. It's got it's interesting because it spans kind of like the 80s to current. So I like, I don't know if you follow the podcast, but I like this multi-generational aspect of the triangle that we have where every generation kind of does their parts and stands on the shoulders of giants, kind of a setup.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're kind of a legend in the triangle, but I'll pretend I don't know your backstory so we can go into it. So folks that don't know you. So let's start with your personal background, kind of how you got to be in the investing and entrepreneurial world.
Yeah. So when I, out of college and out of business school, I ended up in the 80s going into consulting and had a great run, partner at one of the big firms and so on. But I always had this itch, Scott, to be an entrepreneur. So I walked away from a New York City office and down to my basement in my house and wrote a business plan. And I hit a good wave at the time. It was kind of the roll-up waves in the early 90s. And so, and I developed a plan, and believe it or not, I raised $3.5 million in the first round with just a plan, not any location or anything. So it went on to raise about 60 million, and we sold it in 97 for my revenue was 55 million, and we sold it to a private equity firm out of Connecticut. And so that kind of, all right, now I got the wherewithal. I'm a Scot Wingo. I had a success. I can now spend time and invest. And so when I turned out to have a very fortunate piece in this puzzle, which is I'd gone to UNC and I knew Raleigh Tillman, who was a very famous professor at the business school, and he was running the entrepreneurship program. And he said, "Hey, why don't you come try teaching?" I'm like, "What?" But I did in 2000, and I team taught with him for 2 years, and I've been teaching. I'm still a full-time professor at the business school in entrepreneurship as part of the gigs that I have. But that allowed me, Scott, then to have time and money to spend on investing in early stage companies. And so I joined 3 different venture capital firms and a couple of angel groups, and did my passive investing that way for quite a few years until 2017 when we started the Carolina Angel Network. So I'll stop there. That's kind of the lead up to my experience of both, like you, being an entrepreneur and then moving over to the other side.
Yeah. So did you do, before you guys started CAN, which is the Carolina Angel Network, it sounds like you did some individual angel stuff. I can't remember, were you in TIG or Atlantis or one of those?
No, I was in TAP and Corretsu.
Yes.
Those were my 2 angel groups. Gotcha. And a couple of venture capital firms. No, it was, they were a little bit before me, but maybe I just didn't pick up on them. I don't remember. I remember seeing them, TIG and so on, but no. It was TAP.
You're probably busy professoring for a while before you got enough to get your head over, above water to start doing other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. Right now, give us like what's your current. You always have like 6 titles. I never know what all is going on. So it seems like you're still teaching. Is that?
I'm still teaching, although that will end, Scott, on June 30th. Uh, and and then I'm still on the board of CAN, of Carolina Angel Network, but I turned over the executive role to Maureen O'Connor about a year ago, a little less than a year, no, about a year ago, I guess. And then we hired a junior person, Brett Lang, who is going to be part of this group to be the director. So got a whole new team, but I've been helping coaching them through the last year on deals and so on. So, but the first 6 years were my responsibility, my wins and losses, right?
Yeah. So you were, is it safe to say you're one of the founders of CAN? Is that like
Yes, I would actually, yes, say that I was there at the beginning with John Glushik at Duke and Joe Sinsheimer at NC State. So yes, the three of us kind of organized, shared best practices, did deals together. We did a couple of deals together. So it was nice syndicate startup world.
Yeah. And then, so for folks that aren't familiar with CAN, maybe kind of like, do a little pitch of how you guys, how it operates, the type of check size and the sweet spot for CAN. And maybe, I know you've been at it 6 years, but maybe try to summarize how many portfolio companies and how much dollars you've deployed.
Sure. So first of all, it's a network, not a fund, which means that individuals who join for a small fee, and it's like $1,500 or $1,000, whatever, they get the visibility to see a deal, but they make their own decision on to invest and how much to invest. We have a minimum of 5,000 if you're going to invest. We've recruited, Scott, a little over 400 alumni to join over the 7 years.
Nice.
There's probably 80 or so right now that are pretty active. We've done 32 deals and about 35 million from those individual investors. And it has the usual mix of some good exits and some craters, as you would expect, as you and I know, over those years. Typically, I know the number sort of sounds like about 1 million, but typically in the first round, we'll call it a Series A. We don't really do pre-seed. We will look at seed because we will be in the medical products world. So oftentimes they're just about going into the FDA process. So I call that seed, but typically we'll put 300,000 to 500,000 or 600,000 in the first round. And most of our portfolio companies have had second rounds and so on and so forth. So if the number sounds like on average about 1 million, that's about right, I guess, if you think about how we do it.
So no pre-revenue. So on the technology side, generally you want to see them have a fair amount of momentum. So usually north of 1 million or 2 million in revenue to get to that seed.
We'll even look at it. I mean, a lot of it's got on let's take the non-medical biotech stuff. As long as they've got enough customer traction to be able to talk to customers. Originally we said 500,000, but it a lot depends on what the traction is, how many there are, because you want to know what level of turnover or churn there is, and so on and so forth, and success rates, etc. So enough traction to have that kind of review process.
Right. So it sounds like, so you guys do, health tech, not health tech, but like biotech, life science deals. So devices and drugs and that kind of thing. Are there any categories CAN absolutely says, we know our network isn't really interested in this, or?
No, not really, other than nonprofits. We won't do a nonprofit. No, we've gone the spectrum of, I don't think I think if I look at the portfolio, we might have one biotech, Scott. But we do have several diagnostics. We do have, so there's room in there for those as well. I would probably say leaving aside medical IT, I would say probably medical products, diagnostics included, probably is 25% of the portfolio, 25%.
Yeah. And then obviously you guys are associated with, UNC. And my understanding is, maybe you say it, but there has to be a connection to the university. Like what are some of those connections that work for you guys?
Yeah, yeah, it does. And the rule that we use is somebody on the management team or the board chair has to have some connection to UNC. In a few cases, Scott, it's been people who have paid tuition for their child,
Yeah.
which I consider,
Yeah.
yeah. But no, that's the connection that they have to have, either on the management team or the board chair. We've had people that tried to appoint a board member, no, that
Yeah.
we didn't quite accept that as a ground rule.
We've had people say they would move here for our little $25,000 check, and we're like, no, if don't do that. That's like that's almost like an anti-signal for us.
Yeah.
How about over the and we can just stick to can, or you can go back to tap if you want. Like, so what have been some of your most successful investments as a angel investor?
Well, I think the ones that I look back on are the ones that where the revenue model and the growth model had huge upside potential, and they demonstrated it. So, a company that's doing, say, 2 million, but if you track it for a couple of years, their revenue growth rate is, 230% or something like that. That's the one that you really love. I'm also, I should mention this because you asked about tap and you asked about can. I've been involved with something called the Carolina Research Venture Fund, which is an internal fund, a $20 million fund inside the university. And I was one of the founders with Sally Shuping Russell, and it's still out there. But we actually had one that went public, G1 Therapeutics, Scott.
Nice.
So
a tech transfer kind of technology out of UNC, kind of a
yes. I would say it was a tech transfer, but it was actually Hatteras. We built CRV, Carolina Research Venture Fund, around a relationship with Hatteras. So Hatteras would scout the walls of the university and look for technologies that they liked, and they led that one, and we invested alongside it.
Cool. So you had an IPO, and then one of the more recent ones I know was a big win for Can was the Carpe guys. Which I love it when the things you wouldn't expect would be big exits. Like that's been one of my observations. Is it's very humbling to go back and think back to what you thought about these companies, and then it's sometimes the craziest ones just do great.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a great story because I can remember John Glushik and I met with them. They were barely out of college. They, had invented the cream in their laboratory somewhere. They were a mix of UNC and Duke students. But I think one of the things I learned from that, Scott, was from the very beginning, John and I found a really good board chair to coach them, and be there for them. And so I think that was a big help. Another one that was kind of fun was, do you know Voice, Scott? Does that ring a bell with you?
No.
So Voice was developed by Andrew Royce is his name. He was a undergrad at UNC, not far out of school, not quite like the Carpe guys, barely ink dry on their diploma, but Andrew decided that when it comes to people that walk into a hospital that don't speak English, the hospitals tend to have large staffs of translators. But if you have an emergency situation and they come in, the ability to get in touch with this translator and bring them to the hospital and so on takes a while and causes problems. And it's also expensive because they have 20 or so, UNC had 20 or so translators on their staff. So what he did was he developed a online connection that you can reach a translator within 7 to 10 seconds.
Hmm.
And as long as you have an iPad, you can begin treating them right there.
Neat.
And it's been a huge success. I mean, they signed up major hospitals all over the country, and he's in the process of going through one of the exit process, Scott, you and I know, with an investment banker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's another example.
Yeah. How about some investors keep an anti-portfolio, the ones that kind of got away? Do you have any that come to mind of like, man, I wish there's something you didn't see or you missed it or anything like that?
There's probably I probably don't track those, Scott, as well, because there's no value in spending energy on a missed opportunity. It's kind of like, okay, I don't talk much about the Duke UNC basketball last weekend.
Yeah.
So no, I do know that there's a couple that were on the West Coast that we just didn't have enough expertise. They were kind of like, and I would say the other thing too was, and maybe you've seen this, but the West Coast deals for a long time were way overvalued. We have one that has, virtually not even gotten into the FDA process, and they have an $80 million pre-money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to make money when for the early stage investor when things get so inflated early on.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I can't say I spend a lot of time, Scott, thinking about, oh God, if I just made that free throw, I would have.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever calculated the number of pitches you've seen, but let's say you've done can for 6 years, maybe you see 10 or 20 a year, and tap, and so it's got to be easily 100, 200, 300 pitches you've seen. For the contestants out there that are going to join this contest, and they're going to be a little bit earlier stage for this. They're going to be like what we would call pre-seed or pre-tweener in our language. Mm-hmm. What's your advice on either do's and don'ts of pitching?
Well, definitely want to practice with people that are friendly to you, because one of the things you're going to find is you didn't anticipate this question. And so your answer isn't very good. So go practice with people and, let them ask hard questions. Be prepared, because, I never remember. You'll like this story, Scott. Scott Maitland told me the story. Scott started at the top of the hill in Chapel Hill. Mm-hmm. He went to the bank. He started with his number one bank that he went to raise money to buy the place. And he said he walked in and he put his briefcase, in that case, he had a briefcase, on the table and pulled it toward him, and it went a large scratch in the table.
Oh, and bankers have fancy desks too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, make sure you practice. I'll use the same advice I mentioned earlier about the Carpe guys. I look very heavily at who are your advisors and or board members. You may not have to have board members, but I want to know who your advisors are, because I know you're going to make a mistake or you're going to pivot, and I want somebody with experience that can be there that will talk about, the ability to coach. And so coachability becomes very important, Scott, to my criteria. Do I see in that person, if I make a unusual comment, do they go, well, yeah, no, I wouldn't think about that. Mm-hmm. You can tell, you and I know how to tell coachability, and so that's what I look for. In the presentation, I always want to hear first, kind of put me in the shoes of the buyer. If it's not a category that I know, describe to me. Let's take the one I gave you, the hospital, people that run the translation services. So put me in their shoes and tell me what the pain point is. make me feel the pain.
Yeah.
And even though I'm not in that field, if I can feel any of the pain, then I get, how you're going to convince and sell people to buy it. So those would be my three, Scott, I think.
Those are good nuggets from an OG angel investor. So we appreciate you doing this. We'll see you in person when we get into the contest. But thanks for introducing yourself to folks, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So we appreciate you doing it.
Oh, you're great to ask me, and I'm looking forward to it. So all the best.
That's a wrap on this Meet the Judges episode. Now you know the minds behind the decisions, the investors and industry leaders who will be putting these startups to the test. As Tweener Madness kicks off, they'll be asking the tough questions, making the tough calls, and deciding who advances in the bracket, all leading up to the finals in early April. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single matchup. And if you want to follow along with all things Tweener Madness and the Triangle startup scene, head on over to tweenertimes.com. Also, if you're thinking about launching your own podcast or want to bring professional production to your brand, check out Earfluence.com. The competition is about to begin, and we'll see you soon in the next episode.